I want to talk about the pros and cons of attended and unattended recording. As you know, unattended is potentially my favorite way of recording for a variety of reasons. It is also kind of frowned upon, I've found, weirdly, by people who have been doing it for a very long time. So when you think about someone who's done something for such a long time and they're so experienced, I would expect them to take more liberties, to be more experimental. When you get to a certain level, or when you think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you start off by thinking you have a lot of knowledge about something, and then as you learn more, you realize you don't know as much, and then eventually the curve starts going back up again when you do learn a bunch of things and you realize you kind of know enough about this topic. That's where I think at that point experimentation and new ideas and more flexibility should come in. That's how I see things. Some people, unfortunately, they get to that point and they feel like they know everything, and nothing else exists and it's not worth trying more things. I'm not going to go into all that. But it is worth analyzing. It is worth thinking about the pros and cons of unattended versus attended recording. So let's start with the classical way of doing sound recording, attended recordings, or being present while you're there. What are the pros of this approach? How is this better than any other approach? The first thing you can think about is you are there, therefore you can see what you're recording. Most of the time, unless they're hidden in a bush or something. But if you're somewhere pointing a mic at something, or maybe with a surround array or something, listening, checking out your location, that does give you a feel for what you're recording. You're able to write things down and know what the weather's like, or what kind of wildlife you're seeing, what the humidity is like. I don't know, things like that. What do you see in the distance? You might see an approaching storm that otherwise you wouldn't be aware of. These are pros. I like this. I like the idea of this. I like this awareness. One other more philosophical thing is you learn to listen. By having one microphone, two microphones, more plugged into your recorder, and then your headphones on and plugged into the recorder, listening to the microphones, listening to what the microphones are capturing, you get this unfiltered perspective of the microphones themselves. Your brain obviously all the time is working, deciding what's important for you, what's not important. Sometimes, when you're in traffic listening out for potential dangers, you're not going to notice a bird singing, or maybe you will because it stands out. But these decisions are made by your brain even before you notice, even before you hear things at the auditory cortex level. When you leave this job for the microphones don't discern, they just tell you everything. They just get all this information to your ears, and then you can listen to it unfiltered. And that teaches you how to listen. That teaches you the things your brain is keeping away from you, from your perception. You'll hear this very often from sound recorders and non-sound recorders alike. The first time you put a pair of headphones on and you listen to your environment through the microphones, it's like an epiphany. You do really understand the soundscape much better, and you learn to listen. And even, after a while, you can even take your headphones off, and you can reproduce this process, and you can start listening fully. But being present while recording does help with that, with this listening skill. If you're using directional microphones, you can point them at things. If you're somewhere in nature trying to record birds and there's something happening in one tree but not in the other one, you will naturally point your mics at the one tree where the action is. If you're not there, you're not aware of what's happening. You just point mic somewhere and hope for the best. Being present helps you get better recordings in certain cases. Let's assume you don't want to be present in your recordings. You don't want your movement or your breath or any other sounds you make to end up in your recordings. If you put your headphones on and start to listen carefully, you might notice that you do a little shuffle, or your clothes make this rustling noise, or your breath sounds a bit wheezy or whistly. So all of these things you might not have noticed unless you put on the headphones while recording. So another pro is you learn how to be more quiet, how to walk while making less noise, how to breathe while making less noise, how to eat and drink before you go out recording, but not right before. Otherwise you'll end up getting a lot of gurgles and other noises from your stomach into your recording. One other aspect is related to this. If the soundscape levels are too high, you can turn the gain knob a bit further down. You don't have to make this decision once and live with it, right? So if you're recording and then all of a sudden the wind picks up and the mic starts overloading, you can just turn the mics down. You can just turn the gain down if you're present. Another aspect is you can press record and you can stop recording whenever you feel like it. If you're only there to record something that lasts 5 minutes, you don't need to record for a whole day or however long it takes between you drop your rig and collect it afterwards with Unattended. Related to this, you don't need huge batteries and huge memory cards because you're going to record only what you need, not everything. And I think more philosophically, but not 100% accurate, is you're more involved in the recording process. This is one of the criticisms I hear more often. When you're present, you're there recording. You're trying to listen to stuff, you're trying to look at settings, you're trying to place your microphone in a certain way. All of these processes, they amount to being more present and to being more involved in the recording process and to getting a better recording. I have doubts that is the case. Maybe if you're just starting out, if you sidestep this stage in your development as a sound recordist, you might end up not being as involved and seeing recordings as a commodity maybe, or as something you do as a hobby. And yeah, I think that these two things, the level to which you're involved and doing attended or unattended recording, I don't think these things are related to each other. I think this is more related to mindset. I think if you have the right mindset from the start, it doesn't matter how you record as long as you record. And if you have the wrong mindset, you can be present and you can ignore these things and you can not be involved at all in the recording. But these are the pros I can think of with regards to attended recording. And there might be others. Feel free to comment and tell me if you can come up with new ones, with others that I've missed. What are the cons of attended recording? And this is something where people might disagree and might find them easy to overlook, but in my case these are big ones, and these are the reasons I've chose to favor unattended. So first of all, when you think about it, being present in a space, in an environment, means automatically affecting said environment. If we go into a natural space, if we go into a forest or a savanna or a desert, our simple presence there is going to affect how wildlife acts, how even what the space sounds like. The clothing we're wearing, they might be reflective or they might be dampening. They might, in a desert where there's nothing that sound can reflect on clearly, there's the sand dunes, but that's kind of, some frequencies are filtered out, some frequencies are dampened. If you're wearing something very reflective, you're going to make the space sound different. In a forest where birds are singing, you might walk in and find that there's no birds singing around you. There's like a pocket of quiet where birds' comfort zones with other entities being present have pushed them away, or have made them stop singing, or have caused them to utter alarm calls. All of these ways in which you affect the environment can be very easily overlooked. If you're starting out your recording journey, you're just going to go out and do some sound recordings. You might find out that there's no birdsong, or there's very distant birdsong, and it's very challenging to capture good recordings of birdsong in temperate forest, for example. But that might just be because you are in their space and you're going there, spending half an hour moving around, making a lot of noise, smelling differently, being an extraneous entity in this space where birds and animals hang out. So you are unknowingly affecting this environment and making it quieter. It's a big drawback of attended recording, and people just choose to overlook it. But to me, that's a huge one. One other thing that I think you can learn to mitigate with time and effort is the tendency to keep fiddling with gain, with maybe filters if you like to use those, with mic positioning, with moving around and putting mics here, there, everywhere, trying to find a better sounding spot. It's like a creative work. It's never finished. When you're doing something like sound recording, you are automatically choosing a perspective. If you have, let's say, a mono microphone or a stereo microphone or a surround rig, you're not recording everything. You're never recording everything in a given space. You're always favoring something by placing your microphone in a certain way, or if it has a directional polar pattern, by orientating one or another way. And all of these decisions you're making, knowingly or otherwise, will affect what your recording will sound like. So if you don't have the skill of making a decision and living with it, you'll be tempted to keep making this decision. And you'll be tempted to record for a few minutes and then to move, and then to change, and then to fiddle with gain. And all of these things will happen if you're present. It's a big drawback of that as well. You can learn to live with it, and you can learn to go somewhere and press record once, set up your rig once, and then live with it. Or, test a few locations first and then find a better one. And recording like that. But it takes time and effort. And being present does not help with that. Attended recording is not something you can do for weeks. Maybe you can, technically, but you don't want to. Who would want to record for even a day? To be in one spot, not moving, or moving very softly. I don't want to do that. I might want to be in a place for a whole day, to listen, to lie down, to take the space in, to immerse myself, but not to be there to record for a whole day. That doesn't sound like something I would enjoy. It's not something I even consider. I might record there for half an hour, an hour. I might be there for longer if there's something that happens only once in a lifetime or something like that, but not longer. This is something we talked about at the pros, but even if you do learn to avoid ending up in your recordings with your movements and your stomach gurgles and everything else, sometimes it's impossible. If you're recording with Omni microphones and you're quite close to your microphones, your body makes sounds that you can't really control all the time. Gurgles and, joints cracking and all kinds of sounds like that. Even my nose whistles. It's imperceptible. I don't hear it, and most people don't hear it either. But when you're recording something very quiet, breathing in and out might make a tiny whistle. And that's going to end up in your recording. It's a drawback of being present. It's a big one. If you're trying to record a very clean soundscape, devoid of nose whistles or farts, you're not going to be able to do that. And lastly, you might want to record without attracting too much attention. How do you record without being noticed as a sound recordist? Not by being present with a big set of microphones. If we take into account the other aspects where you don't want to be present in your recording either, attended recording is not the way to do it. If you're out in a forest with a microphone and a blimp, pointing it at things, you're going to be noticed very easily. If you're in a city trying to record something, you're going to be noticed. And, usually the question I get is, are you filming? Even though there's no camera in sight. But people do realize something's happening, something's going on. So yeah, it's one of the drawbacks again. And now I think we're going to rehash these from the opposite point of view. So talking about unattended recording, what are the pros of that? You are not affecting the environment as much. Your rigs might still do that, but it's a much smaller chance of you affecting the environment with a pair of lavalier microphones and a small recorder back. Maybe if you have a bigger blimp, that's going to look a bit weird. There's going to be wildlife is going to see it as a new element in their environment. It's going to smell more, but still, it smells less than a whole human being there. It offers less of a surface to see and notice than a whole human, an entire human being there. Especially if that human is walking around making all kinds of noise. And yeah, it's very easy to see why unattended is much better to get an immersive recording. It takes maybe 15 minutes to half an hour, sometimes a whole day, before life settles back into its grooves, where things happen naturally after a human has been there crashing and making a lot of noise and affecting the environment. You can record for days or weeks at a time without, being nuts and having to be there for days or weeks at a time. Setting up a rig somewhere, big enough battery, big enough memory card, you just leave it there and it's going to capture everything if you've set it up right. To me, it's a pretty good deal. It's a pretty big pro of unattended recording. With enough recording rigs, you can capture the sound of this savanna, for example. Over 10 days, you can capture hundreds of hours of recording. Not just how much you're limited to by being there. You can record overnight. You don't have to be out in the middle of the savanna at midnight when the lions are around, when hyenas are around. Granted, that might be interesting to do, but you could do that. You can drive there, be there for a bit, experience it, and then come back. And then your recording is still going. Your recorders are still recording. You can record animals that otherwise would be too shy or elusive with you present. So I've been trying to see leopards here in South Luangwa. It took me 6 days. On day 6 in the evening, we found 2 leopards, not 1, but 2. And I think it's a game of chance, of statistics. The longer you spend in one of these environments, the higher the chance of you seeing one of these animals are. But imagine that, 6 days from one site or 2 sites of a leopard. If you're there for 6 days trying to record things, you're not going to see these animals, and they might not call either. Having said that, if you place your rigs out, plenty of them, enough of them, and they don't attract too much attention to themselves, you have a higher chance of capturing these animals, of getting their calls and getting their behaviors. So again, pretty big pro for me. And I think lastly, and probably the most important aspect to unattended recording, that is a pro for me, is that it forces me to think and to make my decisions once and to live with them. Ever since the first time I did this, I set up a rig, left it there and came back to it, I've improved my technique and I've learned, nowadays I don't even put my headphones on to check. I have a very rough idea of what my recording would sound like if I place 2 microphones or 4 of them or more on a tree, for example, or the base of the tree, in the canopy. Each different mix of these parameters will result in a slightly different recording. But I've made this decision so many times that, not to brag, not to say I'm that good at it, but I know very roughly what to expect. I know roughly what gain level to set. I know how to make this decision depending on what I'm trying to record. All of these big decisions, I can now live with them. It's very easy. I don't feel like I'm missing out by doing this, just because I've done it for so long. And also, I've also become very comfortable with setting up a rig and then driving maybe for 4, 5 hours, 6 hours even, spending the night and then coming back to it and collecting it 1, 2, or 3 days later. At first, somehow it felt very unsafe to leave something so valuable and then to drive for a long time. Weirdly, it seemed fine to drive for half an hour and then to go back and pick up the next day, but not for 6 hours. All these things are aspects that I've learned to live with by doing it a whole lot. Fortunately, the worst thing that's happened is that a baboon chewed through my power bank and destroyed it. And I've had some cables destroyed and by a small rig destroyed by fire ants. But no, nothing more serious than that. I haven't lost a lot of money in the process. And keep in mind, this is one of the cons. Insurance is generally not going to cover you for unattended recording. Yeah. So speaking of the cons of unattended recording, as I started to mention, I don't think there's any insurance that's going to cover you for equipment that you leave out in the field. You might find it might be very expensive. I'm not sure if it's worth it. I've been paying insurance for 8-9 years at this stage and never had to make a claim. I've paid many thousands of pounds or dollars, and I'm not sure if it's worth it. It's probably worth it for the peace of mind, but when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you lose your one recorder, insurance is not going to fix that for you. You need to have peace of mind by bringing a lot of redundancy, a lot of extra recorders and cables and microphones and everything. And maybe when you come back, you can claim the costs of your destroyed recorder or something. But that's a different type of peace of mind. One other drawback we touched on already is you don't have any control over your rig once you've set it up. You set it up and you left. So if something's happening just off the location, just outside it, or if you're recording with a directional microphone, something's happening outside of its pickup pattern, it's going to sound a bit weird. There's no control over that. You have to live with that. I think that's both a pro and a con, because once you make this decision, once you learn the skill of living with your decisions, I think you kind of free yourself from second thoughts, from fear of missing out. You're just, you're much better off afterwards. But in the process, yes, you have to live with these decisions. And if you make the wrong decision once or more times, you're going to miss out. One of these decisions you have to make is what gain levels to set. And I get this question a lot. What gain level do you set for the Sony PCM-A10 with micro OCs in a forest? And, there's no clear answer to this. There's nothing I can say. There's no figure I can quote and say, 21 is the best, or 15 or 10. Because it depends on what the forests sound like. It depends on the time of the year. It depends on what you're trying to record, what you're trying to achieve. There's so many factors. And we're back. Just have to switch battery. As I was saying, what was I saying? Gain levels. You just have to learn by doing. And yes, it's a con because you might end up with a very loud insect calling next to your mic for 24 hours and ruining everything else in the process. But generally, there are ways to mitigate that, and that's something else you learn by doing. A big one, risk to your equipment. As we were talking earlier about insurance and claims and stuff. There's a non-zero risk of animals finding your rig and either destroying it or breaking things, or that's something you have to live with. I haven't had humans tamper with my rigs, have I? No, I've had them close to my rigs. Most of the times they were aware of them and they just ignored them, or just they knew something was there to capture some kind of media. And in Costa Rica there was a group of tourists. They went by the rigs and they called it camera trampa, I think, which is a camera trap. But that was an area where there was a lot of research going on, so I think they were familiar with this, with finding equipment in the forest. Generally, I find that people are less interested in stealing sound recording equipment than cameras, because sound recording is a bit more abstract, a bit more arcane. And cameras, on the other hand, are easy. You point them at things, you click a button, and you take a photo. So maybe they can use them, or they can sell them. They can make a quick buck. But sound recording equipment, it's weird, and people don't care about it that much. Animals, they are less attracted to it because probably cameras, when camera traps, for example, they have a flash, or they have an infrared flash, or sensors that click or make a sound. Whereas sound recording equipment just happens there. It just records, not making a lot of sound, not attracting a lot of attention to itself. So yeah, big one, worth keeping in mind. Be prepared to lose your kit. Hopefully it's not going to happen. One other thing is, if you plan to record for long periods of time, and you also want to record several different habitats and environments, you need more rigs. With one rig, you can walk from a habitat to another, you can record, walk some more, do some more recording. But it's not feasible to leave a rig out for 5 minutes and then to come back and collect. Well, it is, but it doesn't make sense. Unattended recording is all about long periods of time, as we've discussed. Builds off. And you need multiple rigs. Another con, and it stems directly from the fact that you need multiple rigs, is that multiple rigs can get out of hand easily. On this trip, I wrote down in my notes app, I think about 23 or 24 different sessions, drops, and then collected, and then drops and collected again, and drops and collected. And then I completely ignored it. I just decided not to do it again because it was more work trying to write things down and then to write down when I collected them. And I found it a bit confusing. I haven't found a good system just yet. So now I just remember, I think with 5 to 6 rigs, 7 rigs at most, I can... There's a mosquito here that keeps bugging me. I can manage just about. Anything more, I think I would be a bit confused. It would be easy to overlook things, maybe to forget them in the field. This has never happened to me, by the way. I've never forgotten a rig in the field. Fortunately, knock on wood. But yeah, hopefully it's never going to happen. Another drawback is the resulting huge file sizes. On this trip, 9-10 days so far, I've recorded, let me think, more than 2 terabytes. I mean, that includes photos and videos as well, which they're quite sizable, but I expect there to be at least 1.5 terabytes of sound recordings, which is massive. 2496, some of them are 4-channel, most of them are 2-channel. I would have to go back to the UK, my studio, and listen for many, many, many hours. And that's fine with me. I don't mind that. That's my job. I'm a sound designer, sound recordist, composer. I love listening to sounds. These sound recordings are amazing. They're arguably recordings of the desert or something less exciting would be a bit more complicated, more difficult to listen to. But I've never had a problem with having to listen to recordings. That's just how I am. Some people don't care for that. Some people don't want to have that work. But I'm fine with it. I'm not fine with editing all of that stuff, but that's a different story for another time. When you think about polar patterns for microphones, unattended recording does favor omnidirectional microphones, because you're expecting the soundscape to vary. You're expecting your sources to move around. If you're focusing on one very narrow cone, that might change. Once you're gone, the bird might move, or the sound might change, or the wind speed might change, or wind direction might change. So to cover that, to have that covered, you want to use omni microphones, and that's what generally I use. I think 99% of the time I do drop rigs, I use omnidirectional mics, either lavaliers or 8020s or Shep's MK2s, and that's fine. That's worked for me, but it's not the sound of cardioid or hypercardioid microphones. You don't get to focus on something very easily. If something is far enough away, you're only going to capture it as an element of the soundscape and not as a focused sound. It's something you have to live with. Having said that, I did notice, look at a pair of ibises in the tree here. I did notice that this owl was perching in the sausage tree by the main area at the camp here. So I placed a Telinga reflector angled towards it, and I got a beautiful recording of it last night. So you can absolutely use directional microphones, but you have to know your area. You have to do a lot of research. You have to spend a lot of time observing and identifying song perches and where sound sources will be. And probably lastly, one that I do agree with to some extent is the disconnect between the recording process and the listening process. Sometimes when I do drop rigs, I'm tempted to put a rig out and then to retreat, to go away so that I don't affect the recording. But as long as I do enough listening in a space, I think that is mitigated. I'm not here in South Luangwa just to record. I'm here to take in the landscape. I'm here to learn about it. I'm here to immerse myself in the landscape. And that includes listening. That includes sound recording. And all of these are parts of a bigger whole. I go somewhere and put out the rig, but then I drive somewhere else and then I stop and listen. I walk in the national park, taking the necessary precautions, obviously, being with a scout and ranger and guide. But all of these experiences put together result in the fact that I take this environment in without focusing too much on the recording part. So there's no disconnect there. But there's a risk of that. Some people might not be able to juggle these two aspects. I think the fact that I do photography as well and videography does mean that I pay more attention, because setting up a rig uses my kind of these thought processes that I've mentioned so far. Listening to something, trying to identify the best location. But then when I move to a new one, I look at the place as well. I listen, I take some photos, I get some video, maybe I do some sound recording. But it's all a very wholesome process. It's not just one thing or another. It doesn't exclude things. It's not gatekeeping me from doing one or the other. So it can be a drawback, but more often than not for me, it's not. And there you go. These are the pros and cons of these two approaches. I don't think one of them or the other is good exclusively. I think there's a healthy mix to be had there. It depends on what you were trying to achieve. In my case, probably 90% of the time I'll do unattended, and the rest I'll do attended recording while being present. That works for me. I'm curious what works for you. Let me know. Please comment down below.